$168 for this lens. That is incredible value for an autofocus full frame lens. We got a lot to get through when it comes to image quality and the whole performance of this thing. And are there any flaws of this lens? We're gonna have to discover it in this video. What's going on, my friends? I hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic. If you are my channel, please consider subscribing and obviously giving me a thumbs up. Now we've got to talk about the image quality performance of this lens, but first of all, let's go through some of the specs of this 40mm full frame lens. So this Viltrox lens is a new autofocus full frame lens at 40mm. It has an aperture range of f2.5 to f16. It's got 10 elements in 6 groups, 7 aperture blades. Doesn't have a weather sealing gasket at the bottom of the mount. It has a USB-C port here for future firmware updates. It's got a minimum focusing distance of 34 centimeters, has a front filter thread of 52 millimeters, and it's really light at around 180 grams. So overall, with the price so far, we have to take that into consideration. Is it half the quality of the Sony lens, or is it pretty much the same quality for half the price? So that could be a big determining factor if you're going to be buying this lens. Now look, the Sony lens sits at about $598, almost $600 for pretty much the same focal length and aperture, but it does actually have an autofocus to manual focus switch. It's got that custom button and the aperture ring as well. Are these features, worth it in your opinion, or is the Viltrox 40mm f2.5 at $168? That's less than half the price. Is that far more worth it to you than the Sony lens is? And I mean, at the end of the video, let me know your thoughts and I'll let you know my thoughts as well. So what's the image quality like with this lens? So these are some stills taken from the Sony a7 III with my wife, Amber. She was doing the photography side and I was doing the videography side, filmmaking right here. Now this is a very dark situation because I did want a very moody shoot when it comes to the video. She took some stills with this 40mm lens and I kept the grain in there because I actually really like the look of the grain, the grittiness of this actual shoot. And in my opinion, these stills look fantastic. She said the autofocus performed perfectly fine, even though it's on an older a7 III camera, not even the newer Sony focusing systems in the new cameras. But overall, really great performance in this low light situation. And also one thing to note, as you can see by this footage, the lens I was actually using, happy coincidence, is the Viltrox Epic 50mm t2.0 1.33 times anamorphic lens. Now it's one of my favorite anamorphic lenses for the Sony 16:9 sensors, and you can actually see Amber using the a7 III with that Viltrox 40mm autofocus full frame lens. It was just a fun, fantastic shoot. I absolutely loved it, and yeah, obviously be sure to see some of this footage from the shoot with the Viltrox anamorphic lens as well. So when it comes to the image quality performance on the chart, you can see wide open at t2.5 in the center. It's relatively sharp, and out in the corners, it's a little bit soft. If you do stop it down to say f3.2, as you can see here, it sharpens up in the center, and out to the corners, it's still very slightly soft. It gets probably at its peak sharpness at about f8 in the corners, but that is if we are pixel peeping. And if we do stop it down to f16, this is where it's pretty much sharp from edge to edge. Does lose a touch of contrast due to diffraction. But overall, in my opinion, when it comes to image quality and sharpness, this thing performs really good. So what kind of bokeh quality are we getting with this lens? Considering that it's an f2.5 at 40mm, but it is full frame, so you are getting that full frame coverage, which is great. But yeah, can we get some decent bokeh out of this thing? And this is the 40mm at 2.5 at its minimum focusing distance, and you can see the bokeh is actually quite smooth when it is wide open. Now, looking at this lens here at 2.5, you can see the bokeh shape nice and round. If you do stop it down to 3.2, it's still relatively round. F4 is when it starts to get a little bit of shape there, and then f5.6 you can start to see the aperture blades, but it really depends on what you like. I do like the bokeh wide open at f2.5. So what's the chromatic aberration like and the Loka with this lens? And when it comes to the chromatic aberration performance, there doesn't really seem to be too much in high contrast areas. It seems to control it actually quite well. And then when it comes to the Loka, there doesn't really seem to be too much in f2.5. There is still just a touch. If you do stop it down to f2.8, f3.2-ish, it does start to go away, but nothing really bad to really be noticeable. So do we get any flaring with this lens? Is it nice and clean? Let's check it out. So now moving on to some of the flaring artifacts, you can see here, it's not really that well controlled. It really comes down to if you don't like this or if you do like this. When it comes to these edges right here that you're seeing, this is where you just use the lens hood to try and obviously mitigate that. But you know, directly at a light source, you can still see a little bit of flaring, but it doesn't lose a lot of contrast. Now, when it comes to the focus breathing here for video, you can see here it does breathe very slightly, nothing too noticeable. It's pretty well controlled with this one, and I do actually like the performance of this. And same again, it just really depends on if you like this look or not, or if you prefer it to be 100% controlled. And as you can see, when it comes to video autofocus, this is tap to focus. There is no focus pulsing or hunting. It just taps straight where you want it to go and then taps back, which is absolutely fantastic. And when it comes to autofocus performance, it does depend on obviously which camera you have, how new it is, what kind of focusing system it's got, and also what kind of focus settings you've got on as well. Mine's not the extremely fast focus settings because I prefer to have more of a natural focus pull. You can kind of see here it doesn't really keep up incredibly fast, but that's just my settings. And it really, like I said, depends on obviously the camera, how it speaks to the camera, and which one you have. Now look, the size. It is absolutely tiny, and it fits on the ZV range and the A7C range absolutely perfect. And you know, for me personally, I don't care. I don't mind how big the lenses are. I mean, the lens could literally be this big, and I'll just do a couple of extra gym sessions to try and, you know, hold the weight a little bit. But yeah, lens size doesn't matter. But if you are someone that wants to, you know, travel nice and compact and throw this in a backpack, this could be a phenomenal lens for you. So who is this lens for? You can pretty much see that this lens is designed literally like the Sony lens. It's pretty much the same size, it's the same focal length, and it also has that same aperture, just half the price. Sony brought a whole bunch of these 2.5 lenses out, mainly for the fact that they wanted to produce smaller lenses for the A7C line and the ZV-E1 line, just, you know, to make it look nice and compact. Great for photographers when it comes to street, portrait, landscape, travel photography, but also videographers, because this has brilliant autofocus performance, there's low focus breathing, and it's just a brilliant focal length. You know, 40 mil is kind of very similar to what I use. I use between 35 and 50 mil is kind of my, you know, standard filming when it comes to a lot of professional commercial work. But when it comes to travel, you know, 40 mil is a decent amount of coverage. So look, overall, this isn't for me. I don't really do travel photography or street photography, but if you are someone that does that, or street videography, this lens could actually pair up with your camera really nicely. You know, I prefer the really fast aperture, so I do have that option, but size does not worry me. If you do want to check this lens out, you know, I'll put a link in the description below. And yeah, let me know what your thoughts of this lens is, and I'll see you guys in the next time. All right, let's get it.